Thank you, everyone, for being here. How many of you have been to the Dallas Fed before? Oh, boy. So anybody new at the Dallas Fed for the first time? All right, so welcome to the Dallas Fed. This is a regular crowd. And Bobby and I have known each other, it's been 20 years plus, I would guess. And you should know in this job, I always say I talk to a variety of CEOs every month. And I try to talk to Bobby before every FOMC meeting, because if I want to understand what's going on in retail, it's hard to think of anybody anywhere that I could talk to who has more of an encyclopedic knowledge and current assessment of the U.S. consumer than Bobby Taubman. So we're thrilled to have you here. And so let me just start with a little bit about your business. First, how'd you get into the real estate business? How'd your family get into this business?
Well, I never had an identity crisis. My old man was, this amazing figure. He was an iconic figure, and he was involved in such an interesting business. And we used to take our picnics and on construction sites when I was 4 and 5 years old. So again, I always thought he was doing something that was really interesting. And he's in the retail business, he's in the construction business, he's in the planning business, he's in the finance business, he's in all these businesses, and they all come together to create the shopping center. And he was really a disruptor of his time. He was a pioneering design-build contractor that recognized that the interstate throughways were going to create opportunities for development. So people always thought about those interstates took people to downtown, but they didn't think about how it would create opportunities to actually build out in the suburbs. And as people built out in the suburbs and they expanded, people wanted to shop where they worked. So the idea of the big shopping centers really came after the post-World War II, and all those interstates were being created. And if you think about Amazon today, Amazon is a broader selection of goods at a better price. Well, the big shopping centers were the same thing. And before them, the department stores were the same thing. And before them, Sears created the catalog business. Each one, in its own way, was the evolution of a better distribution and delivery system to consumers. So you had better selection and you had better pricing. It doesn't mean that they go away. The catalogs are still successful, but they're a smaller piece of the pie, just like department stores are a small piece of the pie, just like regional shopping centers are going to be a smaller piece of the pie. But, omni-channel is here. So my father was the disruptor. He was, living in a different time. Now we're living in a different time.
So talk about the footprint of your company. How many malls in the United States? And I know you operate heavily outside the U.S., particularly China. What's the footprint of the company?
So today we have 23 large centers in the United States. We have 3 also in Asia that we operate. They tend to be large. We've talked a lot about what's happening, sort of dovetailing conversation about e-commerce a little bit. There are about 1,100 regional malls in the United States. We have said for some time that there's going to be 300 that really own 90% of the value of the sector, and probably 100 that own well over 50% of the value of the sector. So there is sort of a movement to high quality assets. And when we think about omni-channel retailing, the brick and mortar is critical to any retailer, and we could spend a lot of time talking about it if you'd like, but it's high quality assets where everybody wants to be. So Warby Parker said they never open a store. Here was a digitally native brand, and now they have 100 stores. So, same thing's true of Untuckit or, Bonobos.
What makes a high quality mall?
Well, it's obviously the productivity of the tenants. So if the tenants do a lot of business because there's a lot of shoppers there, because they're coming from a dense, affluent market, then you do well. So Highland Park Village that Herb owned for many years was a great asset in a dense market with great affluence, and it's a great real estate asset. So is North Park. So what makes a great asset is the market, but you have to address the market, and you have to do it with always staying relevant to the customer in that market. So whether that's the best merchandising, which isn't necessarily luxury. I mean, luxury could be great at Highland Park Village, but a Zara, a Uniqlo, a moderate price tenant, Forever 21, can be relevant to that market. But you also need more than just apparel. You have to have other destinations like food and entertainment that are bringing the customer.
So what is it about those 800 malls that are unlikely to survive? What is it about them? What are the characteristics of those malls that are going to make it, they're going to have to be repurposed to something else?
Well, number one, the markets may be atrophying. Number two, they probably didn't have the right physical plant, and they didn't have the right anchor stores, or they didn't have the right specialty stores. And what's happening with the bankruptcy of Sears, but there's been a sort of a long-running process about the department store industry.
Yeah.
But with the advent of Sears, you're going to see an acceleration in the pace at which malls become less and less relevant. And as they become less and less relevant, there's going to be, the need for new capital to go in them to make them relevant. But where's the capital going to come from? There won't be debt markets that want to give it to them. There won't be equity people that want to give them to them. Now, occasionally, I met a gentleman earlier who's in the business of actually redoing malls. So occasionally, you can take an old center. It's usually still a good location. It may not be as relevant or addressing the market. Other assets that are competitors may have addressed the market better that are nearby. So you got to find a way to actually improve that asset. So, we were talking about, a medical facility going in that was going to bring 1,500 people a day. Well, you can have some retail next to that, but you can't have 1 million square feet of retail.
Right. How has Amazon and other internet retailers changed your business and changed the mall landscape?
Well, if you think about, go back to those 1,100 malls. Today, there's a Census Bureau statistic called GAFO, which is General Apparel, Furniture, and Other. When you look at those categories of merchandise which are most relevant to the regional mall, they track it the most. Roughly across the board, when you look at all categories, roughly 15% of that business today is being done on the internet. So you can say that some of that's replacing a lot of catalog business. Catalog business was 7, 8, 9% of all. The vending machines was a piece, and this was a piece. So catalogs have really probably been cut in half. There may be 3% of the overall GAFO today. So some of that is matriculation from other forms, but most of it is coming from brick and mortar. So brick and mortar in the United States has about 25 square feet per capita of every man, woman, and child of supply in the United States. So to put that in perspective, Canada is about 14, 15 square feet, which is the second highest developed country statistic that there is. When you look in Europe, you could be anywhere from 2 to 7 square feet. In Asia, from 2 to 3 square feet. Korea that we're building in is 2.2 square feet per capita. And that's all supply. That's big boxes, it's street, it's grocery stores, it's drug stores, it's all kinds of retail. So if you're sitting with 25 square feet, which is a phenomenal number, now this is the most consumer-led society in the world. So, 70% of GDP is the consumer, and this is the most affluent consumer in the world, the highest, but still, 25 square feet's a lot. Now, if you're taking 15% and giving it to the internet, implicitly what's happening is the 25 is really growing to 29. So now you take 25 square feet that most people thought was too much to begin with, and now you make it 29 square feet. What's happening is that the demand for that supply is just not there.
Yeah.
So there is this winnowing process that's occurring. And you go back to the 1100. So if somebody builds 1 million square feet and you got, a Sears store that is no longer relevant and you have another store that may no longer be relevant. So how do you bring the tenants there? They're going to go where really the customers are going to be. So when we talk about 300 malls, most specialty store chains are going to be remade over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years and beyond. And what you're going to see is that chains that might have had 6, 7, 800 stores are going to probably have 300, 400 stores. And they're going to have some on the street levels and, in high streets and locations like that. They'll have some in strip shopping centers. So it won't be just 300 in the regional malls, but brick and mortar will be, in order to fulfill the need. If you look in Chicago as an example, which is 9 million people, Williams-Sonoma had 11 stores. They now believe they need 5.
Wow.
So, but they need 5 because they have to service it. That brick and mortar location is the service center for everything. So 3 out of 4 people have already bought online and gone and picked up the store. There's more and more reasons, the identity, the brand, the servicing,
Yep.
the ability to have inventory spread throughout the country. I mean, technology is changing retail in all kinds of ways, but many of them, they all end up being positive for the customer because they're bringing more value quicker and cheaper to the customer.
So you and I talk a lot, and every time I call you, I ask you, what's the status of the consumer, what's the health of the consumer, and usually you take me through what's going on in the malls, not only your malls, but malls generally. And earlier in the year, the quote used to say, if you don't have a Tesla or an Apple store, and maybe a high-end jewelry store, very high-end, your sales are probably down. And then in the last 3 or 4 months, you started to tell me things had changed. Describe what's going on so far this year with the consumer.
Well, there's no question that, Apple, Tesla have been unique retailers at very high productivity levels. And they really are bringing the exact kind of customer into your mall that you want. But what we hadn't seen, we have 23 categories of merchandise that we track. And if you look over the last 6 years, basically we've never had a year where the majority of those categories have been positive. So in the last 12 months, every single quarter, between 19 and 21 of the 23 categories have actually been positive. So you're seeing across the board. And we've actually had positive comps for 9 quarters in a row. And for the last 3 quarters, we have had apparel comps that have been positive. So it's been 6 years since we've had apparel comps that are positive. Now we have 3 quarters in a row. And I said in my conference call that we actually grew.
Your earnings call.
My earnings call for last week. We're up 8.5% in apparel in the last 3 quarters.
Yeah.
So
which is just astounding.
It's astounding. It really is astounding. But unemployment is low. Wages are up. GDP is growing. I mean, everything is, you haven't killed the economy with interest rates growing.
No.
All right.
That's what I read.
All right. So
he says that to me privately also. So I'd be disappointed if he didn't say it publicly.
But the fact is that things are better right now.
Yeah.
They really are, for whatever reason, tax reform, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can have your politics, however.
So when's the last period you saw like this? That you saw this many high percentage of categories? What were other comparable periods?
And so after the last crisis of 2008, 2009, that was the first year in our history, and certainly the first year in our public company history where we actually had down NOI in our portfolio.
Right. Net operating income.
Net operating income in 2008, 2009. At the end of 2009, the fourth quarter, because it was the fourth quarter of 2008 when the wheels came off.
Yeah.
In the fourth quarter of 2009, we saw up. And from that point forward, in 10, 11, 12, we actually had more than double-digit average growth in sales productivity.
Wow.
So things dipped, but then they came roaring back, and they were strong as could be.
Yeah.
And then they went flat. And they just went flat to really at the end of 12.
Yep.
They started to go flat. So 10, 11, 12 was spectacular. And then it started to go slow. But you have these periods, you have cycles. Right. And, there was an old saying about when times are good, nobody remembers when they were bad.
Yeah.
And when times are bad, nobody remembers when they were good.
Yep.
So it's what happens.
So what's the demographic? The other thing you and I have talked about, what's the demographic that shops in your mall? What's the typical income of that person? What's the distribution? You rely heavily on what kind of demographic?
Well, we're known sort of as the high-end operators. Our properties on average, they average about $850 a foot on a trailing 12-month basis. The next highest in our sector are the Simon Property Group, Mace Ridge, and they're about $650, round numbers. So a lot of that has to do with the luxury tenants that populate our portfolio. Now, it's not just luxury. we have a lot of popular price tenants and modern price tenants that do a lot of business, but we're known as sort of the higher end operator. So with that, you need a market that is higher end.
Yeah.
So you need greater densities of population, you need greater levels of affluence. That means greater levels of education and tends to be greater levels of fashion awareness. So we just spent a lot of money reimagining Beverly Center in Los Angeles. So it sits with 4 million people around it when you really look at its market. And I mean, it's such a strong market. 200,000 people a day go by the shopping center, and at grade. And it's not on a freeway. It's right in the heart of the city. And when you look at all those things, affluence, education level, fashion awareness, it's off the chart.
And what do you consider affluent in your lingo?
Well,
Incomes of what?
Well, if you look at incomes that are over 75,000, over 100, over 150, you're going to see a lot of preponderance of incomes over 150 in the markets that we operate in.
All right.
And Beverly Center is one of those.
Okay, I got it. Now, a lot has been, I know you made you're making bigger investment in Asia, particularly China. Much has been said, particularly recently, about the health of the consumer in China. And I find it interesting. Why don't you tell the group, what are you finding in your properties in China?
So they're off the charts growing. And when we talked on our conference call about where our NOI growth was coming from, over half of it is coming from assets in Asia that are open, that are growing unbelievably. But when people talk about what's the GDP of China, so everybody says, well, it's in the high sixes. And every year, no matter what, it's going to be in the high sixes because they manufacture the number. But the fact is, that in the markets we're in, where you really can track it better, we think that in Xi'an, as an example, where we have a shopping center where the Terracotta Warriors are, if you've ever heard of them. And Xi'an, when we broke ground in 2000, or we started our project in 2011, started telling people we're going to do it, there were 8.5 million people in the market. So today there's over 12 million people.
Yeah.
So that's 7 years later, it's grown 3.5 million people.
Just because people have moved there?
Well, it's all orchestrated by the central government.
Right.
Central government decides that they need to grow that market because that's going to be the center of that province or something. 26 provinces.
Right.
It's like a state that's going to be the capital of that province, and they're going to bring all kinds of capital to it. They're going to build new nuclear plants. They're going to build bridges. They're going to be roads. They're going to be tunnels. They're going to bring infrastructure.
And just to give a little commercial interruption, the reason when Bobby says they manufacture it, what the Chinese do, we believe, is they target 6.5%, and then they invest where there's a gap. They put money in infrastructure and state-owned enterprises. Some of it productive, and sometimes you'll go through China and you'll see a bunch of cities look like they're all built up and there's no people there if you look carefully. But the point is, our estimate is I think they need to move several hundred million people over 20 years from the rural areas into the cities, or they need to create cities. And what you're describing is one of those examples.
But they've already done it. I mean,
And
when you look at the middle
yeah.
class,
Yeah.
when you look at urban,
Yeah.
so you got 1.4 billion people. So 20 years ago, I believe there were 350 million people living in the urban cores. Now it's 650. So they've moved 300 million people. Here's another statistic. In 1980, GDP as a percentage of the U.S. GDP, which was the largest in the world in 1980, obviously, 5.2%. So 5% GDP. Today, in 2017, it was 59%. Now, PPP, which is the purchasing power parity, PPP is actually greater in China. So it's 21 trillion in China, it's 18 trillion here. So when you think about, people say, well, China's, it's no big deal. Okay, well, it's a big deal. And it is actually larger on a PPP basis and has been since 2013. So This idea that, it's only manufactured, when you actually look at utility usage, you look at manufacturing growth,
Growth in the middle class.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And so the sort of $2 a day agricultural, idea of China is totally washed goodbye.
So you're going to do more there.
We are. We are going to do more there, and we have a project in Korea that's been very, very successful, and we're building another one. We just started construction on another one there, but our assets there are growing fantastic, and we're very proud of what we've done here. Actually, our lead director is here, Mike Ullman, who used to be chair.
One of our directors too.
He used to be chair of this branch.
Yes, he was.
And so he's done a lot in China too. He's also the head of Starbucks. Chairman of Starbucks, and they've got how many stores in China? 3,700 stores in China. See, he knows more about China than any of us.
What's the biggest threat to your business? And don't be funny and say the Fed, but although you can if you believe it. What's the biggest threat to your business that is worrying you the most right now?
Well, the transition of e-commerce. Transitions can be rocky.
Yeah.
And so, as you think about our assets, and we absolutely believe that all our assets are in that top 300 group that is going to be the high quality group that not only survives but gains market share, and over time the NOIs will grow dramatically. I mean, in Detroit, when we talk about what's really on the ground happening, and I don't know the numbers in Dallas, but you can see it happening in Dallas too. I mean, Vista Ridge, Collin Creek, Valley View. I mean, these are all assets that have been challenged over the last few years. So if you look in Detroit, in 2000, we had 28 assets that had a department store anchor with them. So today there's 16. And, my brother and I argue about how many there are going to be left. And so he thinks 6 to 8, I think 8 to 10. So there are 3 assets in Detroit, that 2 of which we own, that are going to absolutely gain market share. And as they gain market share and more shoppers, all the best tenants are going to want to go there. They're not going to want to go elsewhere. And all the new, freshest merchandise, the newest brands are going to want to go there. Of course, it's a self-fulfilling cycle. So if the best shoppers are there, the best tenants are there, the best shoppers keep coming, the best tenants want to be there. So they all want it's a virtuous cycle. So we think as that happens, NOI is really going to grow as sales grow. But it takes time, and it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It takes capital.
Okay.
You've all these things.
So the other things you've talked to me about, labor shortages. What do you see in terms of labor shortages among the stores in your mall?
Well, the good news is when you live in an affluent area, or when your shopping center is an affluent area, it does a lot of business, but everybody's employed.
Yeah.
And so you want to try to find minimum wage workers that work in retail stores or work in restaurants and the like. So sometimes you have to create elaborate busings and all kinds of things just to get them to be there. So almost every one of our centers has a labor shortage. Almost everyone.
How are tariffs affecting you?
Well,
tenants?
I don't really. I mean, the tenants. There's a lot of worry about commodity pricing and perils and things like that. But so far, I don't think we've seen it. It's you worry that if prices go up in cars and certain major commodities that are used in houses, things like that, people will have less disposable income to then spend on apparel and other goods in the shopping center. But I don't think that we can tie anything right now to the tariffs.
So one of our, we're taking questions from the audience here. Do you foresee a time where there'll be no retail outlets and all browsing, shopping, purchases, and deliveries will be made electronically?
I can't conceive of that. Now, I may just be, engaged in a legacy business that I can't really see the future in the same way. But we've seen a lot of this happening, and we've positioned ourselves as a company to own only high-quality assets for some time. So, we've believed that it's been real, and we've spent a lot of time in actually thinking about, how much physical space will actually atrophy or get used into other forms of property use. So, that shopping center will be raised and other things will go there. Or the shopping center will become a medical clinic like we talked about earlier.
There used to be a big trend several years ago, what was it called? The lifestyle mall, where it had housing, it had residential, it had hotels. Is that a trend, or has that run its course?
I think it's largely run its course. I don't think there's going to be a lot of supply of any retail built in America. We said about a dozen years ago that we thought that supply had gotten to the point where really all markets were saturated and there would be only modest new development. And we predicted maybe one new regional mall a year somewhere built in the country. So over the last 10 years, there's been 6, not 10. And that's for the entire country.
Wow.
There's only one under construction right now, and it's in Norwalk, Connecticut. And I guarantee you the owners wish they hadn't started construction. So, I mean, it is, so supply is choking off. Lifestyle centers were sort of phenomena at a moment in time where tenants were grouping together and saying, we don't need the anchor stores, and we want to get into these unique markets. And I would say that about 20% of what was built are really successful, and most of the other 80% wasn't.
Okay, that's interesting. Is there anyone on the horizon that you think can disrupt Amazon?
The government.
By breaking them up.
Yeah, I really do think that you got to remember the retail. I mean, it was a sort of a quick answer, but I think that the retail at Amazon doesn't make any money. Everything that makes money is in the cloud and all their services.
Right.
So
they're trying to build traffic.
Right, and they barely make money in their consignment business.
Yeah.
So they really, they haven't yet proven that the retail model can work the way they're doing it. With the effectively free delivery, or very quick delivery. The last mile thing is very expensive, and nobody's really figured it out. So it costs money to deliver it to somebody's house and put it on their door. So it hasn't yet proved. They've proven that with really cheap capital.
Yeah.
Remember, their earnings multiple, even though they're down dramatically, like 20% or something from their peak, their earnings multiple is way over 100 times.
Yeah.
So where has anything ever been funded like Amazon with that kind of capital?
Right.
So will it continue? It's not absolutely clear that it will.
Yeah.
So, but to say that their business model won't work, you'd have to be a fool. Mm-hmm. So, I do think that it's still for retail, that broad selection at an extremely value conscious price, and the delivery things that they've done are really hard to continue, but the customer likes it. I mean, if I asked everybody to raise their hand, how many people used Amazon in the last week? Look at that. Look at that. How many people went to a regional shopping center in the last week? Well, it's, but it's maybe 1/4 of the group. So, this is the reality. So you have to deal with that.
So you mentioned Detroit, and obviously your family's been there for a long time, Michigan, Detroit, and you do a lot. I was on the Ford Foundation board. We did a lot with the city of Detroit. Maybe some lessons actually for some of the difficult areas here in Dallas we've talked about. What's been your role and your philosophy in terms of philanthropy? Why do you do it? What are the major things that you've done, and how do you think about it as a CEO of a public company?
Well, I think you have to lead by example. And leaders lead by example. And it's critical to be involved in your community, wherever you live, whatever you do, in some way. Whether it's with a church or whether it's with United Way or whatever it is, whether it's something that's touched your family somehow. I think it's critical that people are engaged, and people that have the honor of leading organizations. That their organizations are part of the community, and you have to be engaged. And then there's a broader community, and there's your industry, and there's also beyond your industry what's happening in Washington or at your state level. So all of those things are, I think, critical. You have to be involved in what's happening around you. Otherwise, I think it's very disappointing.
So you know, and we've talked about this a little bit, and I've talked to other CEOs. The perception of businesses, and I guess the banks have been part of that for a time, but the perception of business by the public in this country has deteriorated. Possible it's on the upswing now. I haven't looked at recent polls, but it's been a problem over the last 10 or 15 years. Why do you think that is? And what do you think business leaders ought to do about it?
Well, the wealth gap has widened. There's no question about that. And, wealth has become, a celebrity status for those at the top of the ladder. And I think that, without movement and without some opportunity for those that are less fortunate, I think it creates, a real polarization. And the kind of polarization isn't helped by Washington. I would hope that as sort of there's more growth in wages below, and it's for the first time in a long time, I think you're starting to see some disproportionate gain at the lower end, at least on a percentage basis. But it's just starting. And, education is always, at the end of the day, the thing that helps people. And we have to, it doesn't mean everybody has to go to college. I'm a huge proponent of vocational schools and training, and the like, because some people, aren't, don't want to put the time to go to college and learn, and it may not be a good cost benefit analysis. So, but, training to have a skilled job that you can find in a vocational school that's well above minimum wage pay is something that we should try to do as much as we possibly can.
Has Detroit done a lot to beef up vocational training, skill training?
We've done some, and if you talk about the city itself as opposed to the metropolitan area, we have almost 5 million people. It's not as big as Dallas-Fort Worth now, but we have almost 5 million people. Detroit, pre the civil crisis in 1967, was almost 2 million people, the city of Detroit, and there was 1 million plus people in the suburbs.
Yeah.
So now there's almost 5 million today.
It's flipped.
There's only 700,000 people that live in the city.
Yeah.
And last year was really the first time that there was actually positive population growth in the last maybe 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And so you've got tremendous illiteracy in the city. You literally have over 50% of every person in the city that doesn't read or write. They're functionally illiterate. So, if you think about that, the sort of generational result of someone not being able to read and write and talk to their kids that way, and give them the benefit and the reasons to go to school and all the rest of it, it's really troubling. But you are seeing a rebirth in the city that is remarkable, and there's a lot of reasons for it we could talk about, but there is a rebirth, but the neighborhoods still have a long way to go.
Okay, so let me take a few more questions here from the audience. We're jumping around a little. In China, first of all, to build the malls that you built, how much harder is it to do it there than it was here?
Well, we have a terrific strategic partner there called Wafujing. They're the second largest department store retailer in the country. And they're a state-owned enterprise in the sense that they're a public company, but about 35% owned by the state. So they are a terrific strategic partner for us. And we don't actually entitle stuff in China. If we're going to joint venture into a deal, either they will have done it or a property owner, land partner, will have done it previously, and then we'll be bringing the deal to us for us to help plan it and help lease it and manage and operate it.
So not terribly difficult then?
Well, But let's say for us,
That would be the wrong way
at
to
the
say
end
it.
of the daisy chain, it's not difficult. But if you're the property guy,
Yeah, but for you as a Westerner, because
Yes.
there's been a lot of criticism.
Yes.
And we spent a lot of time in China, as you know, and I lived in Asia, and about how difficult, at least for a mall operator and joint venture partner, the system's set up where it may be more accessible than people think.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have the right partners,
Yeah.
and they do all the work up front, and we're a big one about FCPA, which is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act.
Right.
So we kill ourselves to be sure everything's clean.
Yeah.
But because there's been a lot of corruption.
And you must have studied this for years and developed
We
relationships
did.
for
I mean,
years.
and one of the risk mitigants that we focused on as we were looking at the possibility of going there was that we wanted a strategic partner. We wanted nothing to do with the land use process.
Right.
We wanted to be on what I'll call the skill set side, which is bringing retail relationships, planning, understanding of the marketing and operations of the center, and it's been a very good marriage, them and us.
So the other question we got from audience is, in terms of rising competitors in China, people are wondering about Alibaba. We talked about Amazon here. How are you seeing Alibaba affect retail there, or is it very different?
I think it is different. First of all, the supply of retail space is dramatically lower, even with all the malls that have been built and all the retail space that's been built. But Alibaba is an enormous force, and you can't underestimate them. And you talk about online payment systems and all the rest. It's incredible. I mean, China in this country is important to us. In Beverly Center that I mentioned earlier that we've just spent a lot of dough in, their number one customer base is the Chinese tourist.
Right.
So the China Union Pay, which is effectively both online as well as like a credit card, that's actually becoming, I think China Union Pay's bank card system now is bigger than Visa and MasterCard put together. And so we have 100+ stores in Beverly Center that accept China Union Pay. Over 100. So, and you can do it online, you can do it, with your, mobile system, you can do it, with a credit card. So, but it's, China's companies are important, and Alibaba is a big force.
Okay. If you had to pick an area of the world or an area of the United States where you'd say, boy, that is someplace we're underpenetrated, we'd like to go.
That we're underpenetrated in the U.S.?
Correcto. Or outside the U.S., either.
Texas.
Makes sense, actually.
I mean,
Explain why.
Oh, I mean, Texas is, the markets are free here. And it's,
and we're growing.
They believe in capitalism here. And it is, there's 24 million people or something now in the state, is that right? 24,
28 on its way, we believe to 40 over the next 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, this is a state to be in.
Scary thought.
And unfortunately, over the years, we've owned things here, but we don't own anything in Texas today. I wish we did. And, from time to time, maybe we'll find something to do.
But you'd probably look for an existing property.
Yes, I mean, I think that here, even in this growing market, there is an oversupply of space. And I mentioned North Dallas, earlier, and in North Dallas, there's too much space. And so, especially in the context of the growth of e-commerce.
Okay, so you've talked to me a lot about Zara and other a little bit less about craft-made, handmade items like Shinola, but you're very familiar with Shinola because they're headquartered in Detroit. How's that affecting retail?
You mean Zara?
Well, let's start with Zara, because I know you thought that came out of the blue and has been enormously successful.
Well, when we say came out of the blue, they're from Spain.
Yes.
And
vis-a-vis
the
the
most
United States.
successful, there's two guys, the most successful guys in the retail in the world.
Yeah.
So one is the guy that owns Zara. He owns 68% of the company. And the other is Bernard Arnault that Mike used to work with. Okay,
right.
So, and he owns LVMH, which is, all the luxury brands that you can think of, basically, other than Gucci. And so,
When did Zara first come here?
well, Zara's been here for probably less than 10 years. I would think less than 10 years. But they are, Forever 21 is a different kind of Zara. And the idea of sort of being able to make product, it's called fast fashion. So it's called fast fashion because it takes what's ever hot in fashion and is able to produce it instantly at a very low cost. So the times it used to be, I mean, you know, Michael remember from the department store days, I mean, it would take a year to get a product made or longer. So there was always this gap in where the market was and what the delivery of the product was and where you're going to be right. And then the reorder times took, you know, if you had a hot product, you know, that sold out immediately, there was no way to replenish it. So today, those times to be able to get to market with a hot product are literally in a couple of weeks. So the fast fashion is really the epitome of that. So Zara is
And
fashion.
can I ask one question for you? How do they do that again? How were they able to do it?
Well, it's the whole logistics chain. I mean, technology is
Okay.
I mean, we talked about earlier technology enabling better, you know, to serve the customer better. Well, a lot of it's back of the house that they don't even understand. All they know is that they come and they see something they like and they buy it. And it doesn't tend to go away. I mean, if the pink blouse is the one that's selling, then that pink blouse is not going to go out of depth, out of inventory, because they're going to feed that store with the pink blouse every night.
So it's much better data, much better data,
Much
logistics.
better data. Well, and the logistics chains allow you, I mean, Jim Gold is here he could talk to you about logistics chains a lot better than I could. But so, you know, Zara has been able to do this to a T. I mean, there's no one better in the world that's able to deliver a fashion product instantly into their store. And they've been very careful about their expansion here as opposed to others. You know, the big four in the fast fashion are Uniqlo, Forever 21, H&M, and Zara. And Zara is sort of a, you know, not purely fast fashion. And we have 9 brands actually that they operate in China and in Korea. I mean, I think we have 8 in Korea, 8 different storefronts with different merchandise, and 9 in our 2 centers in China. So here they have very limited distribution of their brands yet because they're taking it very slowly, and I think very smartly. So, but they're terrific. We just opened a 28,000 square foot flagship for LA, the flagship for LA, that has their full line, including children's wear, which they don't have in LA other than there. And as an example, at the Grove, which is near us, it's 14,000 feet. At Century City, it's 12,000 feet. So 28,000 square feet is double. And it's a very deep assortment, wide, you know, deep inventories, deep selection. So it's terrific. They're very happy with it, and we are too.
All right, so I'm going to ask you one last question, which a little bit talking about the future. If you had to look where the consumer is going to be, which may surprise people over the next 10 or 15 years, and how you may need to change to adapt to it, what are some of the out-of-the-box trends that you guys are at least brainstorming about that you need to be thinking about for the next 10 years?
Well, there's no question that the mall is, you know, moving from its traditional model, I'll say, which was a department store destination model, where typically 60 to 70% of the total supply space was dedicated to department stores. And it's sort of turning itself inside out. So, you know, I'll mention Beverly Center again. We essentially ignored the 2 department stores, even though they're important, Bloomingdale's, Macy's. We essentially ignored them. And we turned a building that was essentially a fortress inside out. We went to the street level and said, you know, this is sort of this, you know, looks like a prison. In fact, it used to be called the brown bag that the Blue Whale came in. Well, the Blue Whale is the design center, Pacific Design Center up right nearby. So we totally curated the first level with 9 or 10 restaurants. We're putting in the best multi-brand designer store in America. It's called Webster from Miami. It's a spectacular store. It's a little bit like 4510, if you know 4510 here. The center is just on fire because we've turned it inside out. So, and we've got much better destination in terms of food, entertainment, and the like. So we're going to have to see out, we have centers that have aquariums in them. We have Legoland in them. We have, different, we have bowling alleys, pinstripes, round one, people like that. We're finding reasons for the customer to come that are not just apparel.
Yeah.
And even though apparel is going to continue to be very important, and it's not just the department store. We got to find things that are going to create more productivity in order to create more interest on the customer, because the customer needs to, it's all about the customer. If you're not 100% focused on the customer all the time, you're dead.
All right, and on that happy note, thank you, Bobby, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you for, it's been conversation.